Why don't we go ahead and get started? We got a couple of fairly meaty items on the agenda. Let me bring up the chat window here just in case something happens there. I can see it. All right. So I see Gabriel is on. He raised an issue last time that I thought we needed to give plenty of attention to, so we're going to come back to it today. And that is, the notes I took last time were start merging from Ether to box to on-ramp. I've kind of put a slightly different title on it, but it's the same idea, which is on-ramp readiness and the future of Ether in a box. So what I thought I might do, since it's not actually happened. I talk about on-ramp during our calls, but I'm not sure how many of the folks on the call have spent any time with it. I would do a really quick overview to highlight some of the ideas in on-ramp, and also point you at the latest little bit in the guide, which I've just updated because there have been a couple of things that have happened, which I'll get to in a minute here. So let me try to do the screen sharing, and then we'll have a bit more of a discussion about it. All right. So, of course, everyone knows the overview picture. This was a slightly more general than we necessarily need here, but I thought I would sort of explain how I'm explaining on-ramp to other people so you would see that. We all know the story of Ether's components and the value of local breakout in the enterprise. But pretty quickly, we understand that it's not just about the components, it's about the lifecycle management of those components. And we probably talk about continuous integration as much as anything else on these calls. And this is just a high-level summary of what that looks like. And it was developed over a number of years by what was originally the ONF engineering team. And there was an operational deployment of Ether. And this was their system for doing lifecycle management of that operational deployment. And if you wanted to participate in Ether, then you needed to connect. The model was you needed to connect to that operational cloud distributed Ether. And there was a whole bunch of components that were being used to maintain that. And that ops team had a whole lot of know-how because they had built the system. And it was a handful of people that knew how to do it. But what increasingly has happened is that there are other people that come along and they no longer want to deploy or connect to the global Ether, which is end of life anyway, but to have their own Ether. And the challenge in doing that was that the tooling was set up to support the operational Ether cloud has been challenging for people to come up to speed on to manage their own, perhaps quite modest deployment of Ether. And so what we have been doing over the last several months is retooling the deployment end. Everything on the continuous integration has remained largely unchanged, but it's retooling and moving to Ansible on the deployment end. And that, picking up the artifacts and deploying them into your copy of Ether, is what Ether on-ramp is about. It's purely a deployment tool. And that evolved over the last several months in collaboration with Blah and Shabazz at Purdue. Originally, I started out by adapting Ether in a box and made, I kind of got it all in my head. And then when I started talking to them, they had already started using Ansible to deploy Ether for their own purposes and had what looked to me to be really slick tooling. And so Blah in particular worked over the summer as an intern at ONF, taking what I had concocted out of Ether in a box and Ansibleizing it. So the big high-level point here is that on-ramp was about transitioning Ether from being a managed service to a deployable platform. It includes the tooling you need to manage a cloud service. So it's still a the output is still a managed service, but it's now one that you manage instead of somebody else. And the overriding goal, which is kind of subtle but important, is to help people own the configuration. So I was trying to avoid magic happening where suddenly it worked. You needed to know if there was a variable being changed because you needed to own that variable. And we kind of have a range of people using it for different purposes, adapted for different purposes. It's designed to start small on a single server with either an emulated or physical RAN and then scale up, but you can also scale up the cluster and you can scale up the emulation as well. It has a goal of full glory Aether with a multi-site hybrid cloud, but that is still in the future. And one of the key design principles or whatever is that I wanted to make it easy that if you had a new feature you wanted to add to Aether on-ramp and how people bring it up, then it should be easy to fold that back into on-ramp. And that takes advantage of basically Ansible. So there's submodules that get imported. There's a submodule for the various components. There's a repo for each of the various components, so that gets you some level of modularity and independence. Ansible roles, things get modularized, so you bring up the core independent of routing, and you could change the way routes work, for example, and there's a new role I'm going to show you in a minute. And kind of at the top level, Ansible variables made it possible to put together what is kind of like the root configuration spec that specifies everything else. And for lack of a better word, we've been using the word blueprint early on, so I kind of just retroly applied it here. There's a set of blueprints. And so what Aether has in terms of blueprints today is an emulated RAN blueprint. And the key thing here to note is that you can scale up the number of servers that run the core, and you can scale up the number of servers that run the emulator. And the emulator is external to the core, whereas it used to be internal. So they happen independently. And this has been really useful in the research, for example, because if you want to put scalable workloads on the control plane of the core, then you need to scale up the RAN, the G-node Bs that you emulate. And the other takeaway here is that substituting a physical G-node B, it looks exactly the same. We haven't tried it, but you should be able to run G-node B sim and a G-node B at the same time, and it should just work. We haven't tried that combination yet. So that was the where we were headed, but we also wanted to support the more modest, bring it up in a single box. And so we had to actually retrofit back. And so there is what we call a quick start blueprint that basically takes one container and brings it inside of the same virtual machine. It's not technically inside of Kubernetes, but it's inside of the same virtual machine or server as the core, and it basically brings that bridge from an external server internal. So those are three blueprints. There's a fourth blueprint which substitutes an E-node B for a G-node B. And what we've been working on, and now there's some progress to report, is some additional blueprints. The first one is something that Bala has been working on, but it leveraged heavily what Gabriel had done at Intel Labs, which is supporting multiple UPFs. So again, there's a sort of a top level spec, which is a vars file, main-upf.yaml. You substitute that for main, and then you type, these make targets. There is a new role inside of the core repo, and it's the UPF role in it. So you can bring up the core and you can bring up UPF. They're separate roles. There's a new template, a new values file that specifies how to configure the UPF. We also had to come in and add a new template to the rock role to bring up additional models, because it's not enough to bring up a UPF. You have to bring up the device groups and the slices and do all the bindings between all of those elements to get connectivity to that UPF. And then there's a modest update. This is not actually how it ended up. I anticipated this what it would look like, but it's a little bit different. There's a configuration file for G-node BSIM so that you actually can put workload on the new UPFs you brought up. And the goal, and this is still to be done, but because this all runs as a package, it'll be very straightforward to add this to the Jenkins jobs that run nightly on on-ramp. There are 2 other blueprints in progress. Wu Zhang couldn't make it, but he said that he has this done to a first approximation and he's testing it. And basically that will bring up SD-RAN. It'll connect it into the existing SD core. And there'll be a root spec file for it. And the other one is, I'm calling it the throughput test. That might not be quite the right name, but we're going to bring up UE RAN sim, kind of mimicking what we did with G and B sim, but it has user plane workload that it puts on the core. We have a modified values file that configures the core to support throughput tests, and then we'll be able to run throughput tests. So this one's still in progress. So that's just to sort of bring you up to date. Let me go back to the notes that we have. And I think these are kind of like one-line summaries of some of that. So in terms of on-ramp readiness, I feel pretty good about where it is. That is not the full equation though. So I at this point, maybe just stop talking, open the floor for comments and questions and general discussion.
A couple questions, Larry. Regarding the moving from Ether in a box to Ether on ramp, is there any, let's say, I don't know whether to call it feature or something like that, but is anything that from Ether in a box that is not being taken into account into on ramp, or basically everything that Ether in a box has is coming to on ramp?
I think it has full coverage. One of the last things that I was aware of was the multiple UPFs, because I know you had merged that into Ether in a box a while back. I believe it has full coverage. Now there's people that have tooling out there, obviously, and this is, they would be impacted, but there's no, even if we were to decide to migrate, there's no one's going to pull the plug on Ether in a box. Yeah, I think it's got coverage. I can't think of anything up at the top of my head.
Okay. Then regarding the on-ramp, you mentioned that it has sub-modules. I understand that those are Git sub-modules, correct?
Yeah.
What is the purpose of having Git sub-modules?
Independence.
Independence of what with what?
What? So the way that I'm thinking about it, and this is still to be proven, is that different people would potentially take ownership of different subsystems in the context of on-ramp. So just to throw an example out there, let me give you 2 examples. Bilal has a set of things he knows he'd like to do to the UPF. He can take ownership of that. Wu Zhang is undoubtedly going to, and a community perhaps built around SD core might want to come to own the SD-RAN module. So the original motivation, and I'm not sure if Shabazz is on the call, which we just inherited from the way that they were doing it at Purdue, is that each of those submodules actually could be used completely independent of anything else. We haven't religiously made sure that still holds, but it should be possible to pick up the SD core repo independent of anything else, and it should still work.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, it was a modularity decision.
Okay.
And it's not perfect, because whatever you do in your independent repo might depend on something in another repo, because your SD-RAN and you needed to set some configuration on SD core. And that's kind of why having the on-ramp as kind of a root repo makes sense, because I can now go define a vars file there that applies across the two different submodules.
Okay, thanks.
That's the rationale. I don't know that nothing here is in stone. So I didn't. Oh, I guess I got my. There's progress being made here. This is not complete, but GS Labs is hard at work supporting and expanding the set of blueprints that are being tested nightly. So I would, this is a work in progress. What I'd like to get to is that if someone submitted a new blueprint, we would, say, oh, okay, that's good modularity. You've conformed to all the standards here, so to speak. By the way, can you give me the Jenkins job, or at least give me a just enough documentation that I could easily build the Jenkins job that would test this. So I think that becomes a kind of requirement to add a new blueprint.
One more question based on the Jenkins that you are showing right now. There is a few kind of like it says build queues regarding 4G. So is the goal to keep maintaining 4G, adding new features in 4G?
So what you see,
what is the?
Yeah, very good question. This is Jenkins globally. I'm showing you the dashboard of the on-ramp specific job. So there's some of the stuff over here will be other kinds of tests. And we have had an ongoing effort to try to winnow down, have ownership of what tests are being run. With respect to on-ramp, yes, one of the things that is in progress is an eNodeB blueprint connected to the core, to the 4G core.
Okay, so the goal is.
So GS Labs has both a gNodeB and an eNodeB, and we're trying to get to the point that they get tested nightly. I actually have a gNodeB running continuously, so I know it works. I have not been testing the eNodeB on a regular basis, so we need to get that one up to make sure it still works.
But the goal basically is to maintain 4G and 5G in on-ramp.
The goal is to maintain 4G for physical eNodeBs. You ask, is everything covered? The one thing that was purposely left out was emulated 4G.
Okay.
I mean, if that was important, someone could add it. But from my point of view, when I got started, I considered that.
Yeah, no, my point is why to still having 4G. That's more from that perspective. So why not fully concentrate on 5G?
Yeah. So eNodeB, there are people with eNodeBs that I wanted to be able to support.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's orthogonal, but it's a really good point that there's still a bunch of jobs that get run that I'm not sure where the value is, and we need to continue to understand that, and that's actually somewhat related to the next big bullet item on the agenda, which is more rationally, getting a better handle on what's going on with CI and when it doesn't work, why doesn't it work, and what can we do about that?
For what it's worth, those 4G jobs are also semi-stuck. They're not actually running as constantly as they pretend to be.
Okay. Yeah, I was kind of guessing. This kind of came up, I think, and putting words in Gabriel's mouth, so please say them differently, but this kind of came up last week because I know that there had been some pull requests submitted against Aether in a Box that had not been acted on, and sort of the question was, what is the future of Aether in a Box? And I can't speak specifically to that. There are people that have been maintaining it. They've been pulled elsewhere. Other people could step up if they wanted to. All I can tell you is what we're trying to do with Ether on-ramp, and then it's kind of up to individuals as to whether they migrate there. That's one answer. Maybe another answer might be, do we encourage people to shift? And or do we encourage newcomers to start an on-ramp to start out with? That one would seem to be easier, but I'd really like to hear what other people think about that.
In general, at least from my perspective, on-ramp and Ether in a box, kind of the essence of both is basically the same to kind of make things easier to deploy a 5G core network and other components. And would be just to have one of them instead of having two. And if one is not maintained anymore, it would be good like to leave it as there, like as an inactive project or something like that. But it would be good to kind of let the community know which one to start using, right? As you kind of suggest, probably on-ramp for new users would be good, and just move from there and avoid confusions in starting on Ether in a box and then figuring out that there is not being maintained and then moving to on-ramp. Probably it's gonna be a little bit overhead especially for new users.
Is there, I think that makes sense to me, but is there anyone that would
also
see
probably
that differently?
we need to probably document or put some video for how do people move from AIB to on-ramp, something like that. So if somebody's using AIB, how do they move to on-ramp?
Yeah. So doing some tutorials would be helpful.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's good. I mean, if you are already up to your neck in Ether in a box and it's working for you, and you're getting whatever you need to get done, that's fine. Now, where I think it might become an issue, I mean, there's no reason to stop doing that, but where I think it might become an issue is if you have a new feature that you want to contribute back, you would need to, it would be easiest if you took the step then to make that new feature available in on-ramp. / that's where it's going to get tested. And I think maybe that's ultimately maybe the pressure point here. So Badri, you're I'm going to guess using Ether in a box to do SD core testing. And they're, quite frankly, I'm sure there's plenty of people that don't even use Ether in a box. They just know how to deploy Helm charts. They bring up their Kubernetes. I would assume that's happening on a fairly regular basis for several of you. And it's only at the point you want to contribute something back that you wanted to test it or integration test it. That's where it'd be a tutorial maybe that would help you. Well, first of all, if what you've got is a new version of SD core, hypothetically, it's a very straightforward way to test that in the context of on-ramp.
Yeah, I think that's what. So probably for me, like since I haven't used on-ramp yet, I've used Ether in a box mostly, and I know how to update the versions of the latest SD core versions on that and test out the basic test. But again, it doesn't integrate the new tests and whatever you have on-ramp. Probably so that way it would be easier if I can move on to Ether on-ramp and test everything. So
yeah. So let me show you how straightforward that is. That's what these bar files are. And again, familiarity with Ansible is a big part of it. But you can put significant GNB sim load on the core by selecting that particular quote unquote blueprint. And this is the bar file. There's a Kubernetes section, which probably doesn't change very much. There's a core section where You can give a new values file, and this is where you give the version number, and you'll notice it's 12.6 there because we had trouble with 8, but we've been testing 8, and I need to upgrade this to 6. And then there's a GNB sim section where you can specify how many servers you want to have running, putting load on the core. And these are just GNB sim config files. And if you did or didn't want AMP, you could select the version. So again, familiarity with Ansible helps, but that's kind of what the documentation's trying to help you come up to speed with.
Yeah, I think I'd like to give it a try and see. So that, I mean, it will be helpful we can give it a try and then help out others who are trying also. Yeah. Familiarity is more, right?
Yeah.
Like you're saying, it's more important.
Larry, before you move from there, so basically in this kind of example that you're showing, it has the core components, it has Gnoll vSIM, and also it has the ROC and monitoring components, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if I understand correctly, this is concentrated for the Gnoll vSIM. So basically the important part to change would be some specific section regarding the Gnoll vSIM. Is it correct? Or...
That is correct. That is correct. And that's what the section of the documentation on GNB sim kind of focuses on. Yeah. Now, you've touched on a point that I've been thinking about, which is AMP is defined in here. Well, you don't have to have AMP.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's a question of, do we carve configuration X and make a second one, configuration X prime, that is X plus AMP? And because all you had to do was, and the documentation explains this, change one variable, you can do it with or without AMP. So is it with AMP a separate blueprint or not? And that's kind of a judgment call. And I kind of came down, if it was so trivial to switch to add a whole feature just by changing one line to an existing blueprint, then not treat it as a separate blueprint. But that could go the other way.
No, in my case, I was kind of more thinking on here in this specific file, we're concentrated on the Gnoll vSIM. Would it be some type of comment saying, separating this section says, okay, you're using this blueprint because you are interested in this specific subsection of the whole thing, which is just the Gnoll vSIM.
Yeah, well,
to kind of emphasize that there is no need to change the other parameters, which is the entire network itself.
Yeah, so you made a good point here, which is these var files could be documented to draw your attention to the key things. I have focused on writing those sorts of words are all in the guide.
Mm-hmm.
Putting it in the code might help someone that was already pretty familiar with the code. So yeah.
Yeah, you can add comments here on the YAML file, so that makes things easier.
Yeah, and I mean, there is actually a README here, which, I mean, the README could also do this a little bit better than it does. Yeah, so the answer of putting more comments in here probably does help. Yeah. That's another kind of balancing act in the sense that I wrote documentation for someone that was coming to this new. If you already are quite familiar with Aether and you just want them, just tell me what I need to do. There's a lot less wordy way of doing that. Yeah, and maybe you can even look at this and sort of intuitively understand, take a pretty modest comment to help you understand what that did. How many servers do you want? How many pods do you want on each server?
Yep.
Okay, so we should move on to the other topic. So I think a takeaway here is comment, add documentation, tutorial, help people make the shift and start pointing them, encouraging them in this direction in sort of the global documentation that online, so they find their way here. Is that? And by the way, just really like to encourage anyone that has a capability they would like to add to jump in and do this. I think it's going to be awesome when we get SD-RAN included. And yeah, Wujong couldn't make it, but he said that it's very close. He thinks it'll be very soon.
And from the SD-RAN integration, is there any plan to somehow, let's say, merge the features between the RAN SIM and the Genus B SIM, or the plan is still keeping them like separate to different entities?
I think they're going to be different entities. There's definitely consideration putting into beefing up RAN SIM. The key thing there is keep in mind that RAN SIM is about controlling all the RAN elements directly, like the DU, CU, RU.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I could imagine an Uber simulator, but I think they're probably going to evolve separately.
And Larry, coming from a novice perspective, just trying to get into the on-ramp deployment, could you explain a bit further in regards to SD-RAN itself? Is the intention behind that to be a simulator or to be a full-fledged OCU, ODU connected to a physical ORU?
So the first step will be, it's a real RAN, a real RIC with real XApps. It's a Kubernetes workload that will get loaded into Kubernetes, sitting side by side with SD core. But the actual elements will be RAN SIM based on day one. We have several options for substituting other elements on the roadmap, but that on day one it'll be RAN SIM.
And did I hear correctly? I think from a previous meeting that SRS RAN could be bolted in,
Yes,
and you could still use ONF RIC capabilities.
that I don't think that's directly been tested yet, but that would be a great outcome. SRS RAN has been integrated with SD core, but not with SD-RAN and the RIC. But yeah, I would love to see that happen. All right, any other questions there? Let's move on to the CI, and I know Daph, you're there. And I don't know who else from Intel that's been blocked behind this is on, but
Yeah, I don't see any of the ones who are currently.
well, Scott's there, and I know Scott's got an interest in it. So
Yeah. So right now, I need to do a reset on the. Let me change. On the make libgo, Onos libgo make test. The PR is no longer accepting retest this, please. So I need to kick it. So if I could get a comment updated on that one. Am I making sense? Scott,
So do we just need to make a superficial update then that causes it to re-trigger?
Yes, I hope. At least I need that to make progress.
Okay.
I'll send a ping to Sean. I'll send a ping to you too.
Yeah, Sean's on PTO this week, so
So let me send a ping to you.
yeah, send a ping to me, and I will either Jordan or Ray is probably the one working on that particular patch. So I will, yeah, we'll get it. We should be able to generate as many superficial changes as we need to keep re-triggering things. So the old thing about dropping a comment on it to cause it to re-trigger, that doesn't work anymore.
it is working, but at this stage, it's not. The last 4 times I've tried, the GitHub PR builder that we use has claimed that it recognizes that it should recheck, but there's been no comment update, which
Huh.
makes no sense to me.
Weird.
Yeah. So anyway, if someone could do that, I'll send a ping to you on that.
Yeah, thanks.
On Libonos, on the OMEC changes that AJ has primarily been working on, that I'm aware of, unless somebody else is working on those, basically NRF, FOSSA, and reuse issues. I've got that pinned down. Right now it's embedded in a bad credential in a script file. Just trying to find the right credential. That should be resolved today. I'm hoping the other 2 as well. I'm aware of those. There's 3 PRs that I'm aware of that are blocked. Are there more that anybody's aware of? I'll take that as a no. If anybody hears about them, ping them to me, and I'll try to get. But I do apologize. This has been going on way too long. I just need to plug through it.
Do you expect we can get, the OnoSlip Go merges unblocked like today, tomorrow? I mean, is it
As long as I can reset? Yes.
okay? Okay. Yeah, we're kind of blocked. We've got some existing work that uses OnoSlip Goes that's kind of blocked on it. So I've been tasked with helping to facilitate it getting unblocked. So one of our fallbacks would have to be to fork if we don't resolve quickly. So I'm hoping we resolve quickly, because I think that'll be a lot cleaner for everybody. Not to fork.
Yeah, I understand the issue. I do realize it's a problem, and
Sure.
push on.
Yeah, we appreciate the help. Thanks.
And I apologize.
Yeah, I don't know if this is related, but we opened a few PRs probably a couple of weeks ago into the ONOS project, and they show the Ether Jenkins main file test is just basically they're waiting.
Could you send me the explicit PRs, Gabe?
Sure. Okay.
That'd be
I'm
great.
gonna go
Thank
through them. I'm gonna send them to you. Thank you.
Okay.
So this was in the PRs
The ONOS project.
on ONOS?
No.
On what?
ONOS project. So basically for the rig.
Okay, thanks.
I've got an email. I've got a DM from you, Gabe, on an issue with display ONO sample Garrett, but that did tell me which PR was going in, I guess.
Sorry, say it again. Which one?
I'll send you the ping offline.
Oh, okay. So let's check that. Regarding that part, is there any plan or to kind of like say any reason why to keep having some repos in Gerrit instead of moving, let's say, to GitHub or something like that?
There's no current plan. That was a decision I didn't have part of, and I've been basically trying to keep status quo. I have no problem making that discussion among the team.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a good discussion. But I don't know. Making it so would be challenging. So ONOS and OMEC are already and OnRamp.
They are in GitHub. Yes.
Already in GitHub.
Yep.
So
documentation, Helm charts for the OMEC are in Gerrit. So
it's a lot of the Helm chart. Yeah, it's the Helm charts and the producing the artifacts. Yeah.
Gabriel, and these PRs for the rock related changes also still in the same state.
Yeah. I believe they should be. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna send the whole list to DAF indicating that, but I highly likely it's the same message that I'm seeing.
Yes.
Thanks, Suresh.
Thank you, guys.
Hey, so hypothetically, how would we do that? Migrate to GitHub from Garrett. And it would, I'm not talking about just replicating it, but all of this, so we'd have to reproduce all of the CI jobs.
Yep.
Which is kind of what Scott had put out as a possibility for the Onos problem, although do we just generally do we want to start making progress towards, I don't know, migrating anytime we have an opportunity, migrating to GitHub and these CI jobs to GitHub? I don't know how to get that ball rolling very well.
I mean, from my point of view, it's a development community. Do you want to, or do the bulk contributors want to get away from Garrett?
Yeah, I think you're right. So yeah,
The primary advantage is the improved review capabilities, but GitHub has review capabilities. It's not quite as solidly and flexible as Garrett's.
so the
Tactics of doing it are fairly straightforward.
it's a little bit indirect here. Because Onos is already in GitHub. The problem that we run into sometimes, and maybe this isn't the best example, same thing with OMAC, is the CI jobs that we have generated related to Helm charts and Docker images.
Mhm.
And that's still, the output of those repos, but it's not where the source is. And the other problem is I don't know anyone entirely has their head around this. Maybe you do, David.
Not yet. I keep trying.
Scott, well, I'm sort of looking for some old timers here. Scott and Andy, do you have any sense as to how we might go about this?
You migrating from Garrett to GitHub?
Yeah.
Well, I would say that, I love Garrett, but, currently I do all of my work in GitHub. So, yeah, I don't know the process by which you would move it. If there's a way to export all of the commit history and then import it, that would be your sort of way to, physically move it over. But then, you've also got to deal with any jobs and such.
Yeah, it's the jobs that strike
yeah.
me as the hard problem. Yeah.
Yeah, so unfortunately, CI engineering is not my forte, so I don't have a lot of advice as to how to actually do that stuff. Other than my observation being that, there are a lot of jobs that don't work, so, maybe rethinking this from the ground up is not a bad idea.
If there was anyone on the call that had ambition to sit down and try to come up with a plan or an architecture for what it would look like, and the plan might be burn it to the ground and start over, but at least that would be a plan. You're welcome to present your thoughts at one of these calls.
So I think Zach Williams has some experience with porting pipelines between Garrett and GitHub, so we might try talking to him.
Good point.
I just want to double check here. Are we looking for a proposal to transition and then decide whether to do it, or have we decided to do it and just making sure we know how?
I think we're still deciding. I mean, I kind of need to see the plan and
Okay.
I mean, if there was a way to reduce the, I don't know, footprint or impact of what happens in Garrett to the minimal, it had, minimal effect on the rest of the world, then maybe it's perfectly fine. It's these jobs that seem to have far reach.
Okay.
I mean, part of the issue here is what people get blocked on is the jobs that are put in place to force you to pass tests before you get to merge.
Right.
I mean, one answer is we don't need those tests. That could get us into all kinds of other problems, but
Well,
maybe not.
how much is, bluntly, how much of this would be alleviated if the jobs just work for everybody and I managed to make everything work cleanly? Would people care?
Probably not so much.
I hesitate. I would hesitate to support that kind of a move solely to avoid one person's inability to make it work. That becomes a job of fix it first and then decide what to go later. Whoever the fix it is doing it. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I mean, until you have your head fully wrapped around what all the CI jobs, which ones are necessary and how they ought to work, then you can't replicate them in the new mechanism.
Right now, let me dig into these and see if I can finish them off as quickly as possible and get things cleaner. And that will also, because part of this is how deep everything is, also help me give an idea of how much disruption would be caused by doing a shift, a transition away from Garrett. And maybe I can talk to that next week.
Yeah, that would be great. I've been maybe slightly misfocused on having this inventory of QA jobs. Maybe the right way is to have an inventory of the CI specific jobs.
Do we need them both?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I put Ransom on here. I don't know if we have anyone on the call that's working on related to that, getting that scheduled. Anything else? All right. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.